Hi, my name is Sheilah Lukins, and I wrote a little children's book called Flying Ace, Errol's Gander Adventure. Now, some of you may already know about Errol from his first adventure when he went to Bell Island. That one was called Full Speed Ahead, Errol's Bell Island Adventure. Now, this is Errol. Well, not the real Errol. The real Errol lives in the garbage box just behind me. He's not in today. He's off having another adventure. But he won't mind if I read you a few chapters out of his book, Flying Ace, Errol's Gander Adventure. So stay tuned. Errol crawled out of his home under the old blue garbage box. He stared at the red and gold autumn leaves covering the garden on Beachy Cove Drung. Yippee! He yelled, diving into the colorful chaos. Errol wasn't like other mice. He enjoyed being awake in the day. He jumped and tunneled through the leaves until the sun rose high in the sky. When he stopped and looked around, he saw an unfamiliar garden. A movement nearby made him duck under the leaves again. He peeked out. A young girl was running back and forth, holding something in her hand. Errol crept closer. He knew he wasn't supposed to talk to people, but the little girl had something Errol was dying to see. Her arms made big swooping motions through the air with an airplane just the right size for a mouse. His eyes followed her every movement. Suddenly he blurted out, "Can I have a ride in your airplane?" The girl jumped when she saw Errol on the side of the driveway. Errol's heart beat in his throat. The girl pursed her lips. You are either very brave or very foolish." "I am very brave," replied Errol, sticking his chest out a little. He certainly didn't want anyone to think he was foolish. The girl laid the plane down on the paved driveway. "Hop in," she said, opening the door for him. Errol climbed in. It was just as he imagined, a cockpit with an instrument panel full of dials and controls. "Can I fly it?" Errol called up. "Do you know how?" The girl squinted down through the windscreen at Errol's tiny face. "No," Errol sighed, thinking that perhaps after all he was a little foolish. "That's okay," the girl smiled. "I'll take you for a ride." She picked up the plane and swooped it through the air again. "Whoopee!" Errol yelled. Ever since he was a tiny mouse, Errol had longed to fly in one of the airplanes that thundered over his garbage box home. "That's enough," the girl said. "I have to go in." She landed the airplane gently on the driveway and opened the door for a reluctant Errol to jump out. "My dad says I have to be careful with this plane. It's very special. It belonged to his great uncle. He was a radio operator in the Second World War, and he flew in an airplane just like this. It's called a Lockheed Hudson bomber." Errol felt faint with excitement. A bomber! A World War II bomber! Wow! Great Uncle Dan flew from Gander to Aldergrove Air Base in Ireland. He was on one of the first flights over. It was really dangerous. The young girl couldn't keep the pride out of her voice. "What's your name?" she asked suddenly. That is, if mice have names. "Of course they have names," Errol sputtered, looking up at her. "My name is Errol." "Errol," repeated the girl. "That's a funny old name." Errol stomped his foot and called out rather rudely, "Well, what's your name, then?" "Natasha," said the girl, flicking her ponytail off her shoulder. Errol looked at Natasha. Then he looked at the airplane and thought about how it was better to have friends than enemies. "I get to play with the plane today because we're driving to Gander tomorrow to visit the Aviation Museum. They've got a real Hudson bomber there, but nobody flies it anymore. My father says this plane was Great Uncle Dan's lucky charm in the war. It saved his life somehow." Errol climbed back in. "Well, it sure looks real." He flicked a few switches, but nothing happened. He bounced in the pilot's seat, and the plane began to roll down the slope of the driveway. "Hey!" Errol cried out, thinking the plane's engine was running. "It's working. Can I try to fly it?" "Come back here!" Natasha cried out, a frown wrinkling her face. She grabbed the small plane, opened the tiny door and tried to fish Errol out with her finger. "Okay," he cried out. "I promise. I won't do it again. Please, just let me sit in a while longer." Natasha took her finger out and sighed. "All right. I've never had a mouse pilot as a friend before." She smiled down at him. "This is sort of cool. Why don't you come with us to Gander?" The next morning, when Natasha got in the car, her father said, "Natasha, that is a very special little plane you have in your lap, and you have to take good care of it." "I promise, Dad," Natasha said earnestly. From inside her pocket, Errol repeated the promise. After a long drive, they arrived in Gander and left their bags at a small inn. "We're going to the museum now," Natasha whispered to Errol. "Make sure nobody sees you in my pocket. Stay down." Errol, however, had no intention of staying down. As soon as they were inside the museum, he poked his head out. Natasha noticed and pushed him back down again. Inside the pocket, Errol found a neatly folded tissue. He opened it up, draped it over his head, and climbed up again. Anyone looking now would see only a white tissue sticking out of Natasha's pocket. Natasha sighed, but did not push him back down again. A museum guide began to speak. "In World War II, the Allies needed bombers to fight the war in Europe. They brought planes up from the United States to Montreal and then on to Gander. From here, some very brave men flew them across the Atlantic to Ireland." The guide pointed to some old pictures. Natasha got as close as she could, and Errol gazed up from under his tissue at a blurry black and white photo of airplanes parked on a runway. Errol had driven by Gander Airport with Natasha and her family earlier that day, and it hadn't looked like that at all. When Natasha's family left the museum to go back to the inn, the sun was shining brightly. The brilliant light hurt Errol's eyes, so he pulled his tissue back in, snuggled up in it, and fell asleep. Some time later he felt Natasha's fingers close around him and pull him out. She held him gently in one hand, lifted a corner of the tissue, and peeked in. "Oh, there you are. Mom and Dad and I are going for a walk." Natasha wagged a finger at him. "Now behave yourself when I'm gone." She put him on the table beside the plane. "I'll see you soon." She smiled and patted Errol's head. Errol nibbled on the cookie Natasha had left him. He tried to imagine what it must have been like to fly in World War II. When he finished eating, he climbed into the plane. His eyes glowed as he scanned the instrument panel. He sat for a while pretending to be a pilot, pressing buttons, making roaring engine sounds, and pushing the throttle forward as if he were taking off. Tired of the game and ready for his nap, Errol stood at the doorway about to jump down when his hind leg caught in a parachute strap. He tripped and fell to the table below. Errol felt a sharp pain in his head and heard a ringing sound in his ears. The ringing suddenly changed to another sound, the sound of an engine roaring to life. Errol leapt to his feet and raced back into the plane. He stared at the lit-up dials and noticed a fur-lined leather jacket hanging behind the seat. He could have sworn that hadn't been there before. A tiny leather helmet stuck out of the sleeve of the jacket. Errol put the helmet and the jacket on, sat down, and strapped himself in. He flicked a few switches and felt his tummy squirm in excitement. With one paw on the throttle, he hesitated. Could he, Errol, a young mouse from Beachy Cove, Newfoundland, really fly a plane? He took a deep breath and remembered the words of his wise friend, Old Rat. "It never hurts to try new things. Be brave." Errol tucked in his tail and sat up straight. It was now or never. Feeling confident and strong, he eased his paw forward on the throttle, and the plane began to taxi down the table. Ahead of him, a window had been opened slightly to let fresh air into the room. If he could steer correctly, he would just be able to slip through. Errol flew off the side of the table, and the plane sank. His heart went up in his mouth, and he let out a long, loud squeak of panic. Just as he was about to crash into the floor, he pulled up hard on the yoke, and the plane rose, sailing out the window.